Okay. Where is the clicker? There it is. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me introduce myself. My name is Ben Arrindell. I'm based in Barbados at Seidel Bank and Trust. And my co-presenter is...
I'm Chris Faiferlick. I'm from EY, but I also work with the Business and Industry Advisory Council to the OECD, and we're going to talk about how BEPS and it's going to affect non-OECD members.
It's coincidental that Chris and I are presenting on this topic because I spent 26 years of my working life with Ernst & Young before I retired about 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. Okay, so I'm going to kick it off by giving you just a brief introduction to the BEPS project and the action plan. The main rationale, if I can get this thing working, the main rationale for the BEPS project is that there is a feeling, particularly amongst OECD countries, that the consensus-based framework adopted by countries to eliminate double taxation, while at the same time it preserves sovereignty, it's been put at risk by gaps created in the interaction between the domestic tax rules of countries and the activities of tax planners, and to some extent also the interaction of the double taxation treaties with the domestic legislation. There has been certainly concern by countries over the allocation of taxing rights between the residence country and the source country under existing double taxation agreements. And certainly in my time with the United Nations group of experts on international tax cooperation, there was significant discussion between the the developed countries and particularly the larger developing countries like China and Brazil and Japan about the allocation of taxing rights, particularly in relation to services.
And Ben, I think that's a great point. One thing I would say to this group that while tax havens are, quote, the focus of this project, I actually think the bigger long-term disputes will be between China, India, the emerging markets, and the US, UK, et cetera, and they'll be arguing about taxing rights, source versus residence, for years to come.
Absolutely. I think particularly in relation to services, and also, as we'll get on to later on, particularly also in relation to the digital economy. Yep. So, we're going to divide up the presentation, but we're going to interact. I'm going to focus mainly on the topics that you see on the screen there, addressing the challenges of the digital economy, looking at hybrid instruments and the effects of hybrid instruments on base erosion, strengthening of the CFC rules. I'm not going to talk much about that. I'm also not going to talk much about the limiting the base erosion through looking at interest deductions and so on. I think Chris might deal with some of that Sure. in his transfer pricing. Counter harmful tax practices, there's really not much to say on that, except that the OECD are proposing to revamp the whole OECD harmful tax competition.
Right, but again, for this group, I think the fair question to ask is how low of a tax rate can you have before it becomes harmful tax competition? Because I went to a meeting in South America, and some of the countries were saying, we want to encourage investment, and how low can we go? And they criticized another country that is at the forefront of BEPS, but yet has their own favorable tax regimes. And so they said, you've got to have some consistency here.
Right, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm also going to talk about measures to prevent tax treaty abuse. And the OECD in the BEPS report said that this was one of the main areas that they wanted to focus on. Prevent the artificial avoidance of permanent establishment status. Well, again, I'm not going to talk much about that. That's ongoing work.
And I can comment on it.